Sarah Chun had always been invisible. At 28 years old, she moved through the world like a shadow, unnoticed and unremarkable. Standing barely 5 feet 2 inches tall with a slight build, she was the kind of person people forgot immediately after meeting. Her co-workers at the tech company where she worked as a software engineer barely knew her name, even though she had been there for 3 years. Every morning, Sarah arrived at the office 30 minutes early. She brought her lunch in a brown paper bag and ate alone at her desk while others gathered in the break room, sharing stories and laughter. During meetings, she spoke only when directly asked a question, her voice so soft that people often had to lean forward to hear her. Her supervisor, Marcus Webb, treated her like furniture, useful when needed, but otherwise ignored. Sarah's adequate. Marcus would tell other managers when her performance came up in reviews. She gets the job done, but she's not leadership material. Too quiet, too passive. Some people are just meant to work in the background. Sarah never argued with these assessments. She never defended herself when Marcus took credit for her innovative code solutions, or when he assigned her the most tedious debugging tasks, while giving the interesting projects to louder, more aggressive colleagues. She simply nodded, returned to her cubicle, and continued working. Her apartment reflected the same invisible existence. Located in a modest complex on the outskirts of Denver, it was sparse and functional. A small couch, a basic television, a bed, and a kitchen table that served as both dining area and workspace. The only unusual items were the dozen houseplants that filled every available surface, and the extensive collection of books that lined 2 walls from floor to ceiling. The books revealed the only hint of who Sarah really was. Military history, combat tactics, survival manuals, biographies of special forces operators, and technical manuals on weapon systems. Hidden among programming textbooks and novels were volumes that would have surprised anyone who bothered to look closely. The Art of War, On Killing, Sniper Training, Advanced Hand-to-Hand Combat Techniques, and dozens of others. But nobody looked closely at Sarah Chun. She had designed her life that way. Sarah's childhood had been different. Growing up in a military family, she had learned early that strength came in many forms. Her father, Colonel James Chun, had served 3 tours in Afghanistan before retiring to become a high school history teacher. Her mother, Lieutenant Commander Maria Santos Chun, had been a Navy intelligence officer who specialized in counterterrorism operations. Strength isn't about size or noise, her mother had told her when Sarah was 12 years old. The most dangerous people in the world are often the ones nobody sees coming. Remember that, Mija. Being underestimated is sometimes the greatest weapon you can have. Sarah had taken those words to heart in ways her parents never imagined. In high school, Sarah had been a classic overachiever. Straight A student, valedictorian, early admission to MIT for computer science. But she had also quietly pursued other interests. She joined the school's wrestling team, despite being the smallest member by far. She studied martial arts at a local dojo, training 6 days a week while her classmates went to parties and football games. She learned to shoot at the police academy's public range, becoming proficient with both pistols and rifles. Her parents supported these activities, believing they would build confidence and discipline. They had no idea their quiet daughter was methodically building a foundation for something far more intense. At MIT, Sarah maintained her invisible persona while secretly preparing for a different path. She excelled in her computer science courses, but she also took every course she could find related to physics, chemistry, and engineering. She studied human anatomy, psychology, and languages. She trained her body ruthlessly, running before dawn every morning and spending hours in the gym when other students were studying or socializing. During her junior year, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. While her classmates prepared for internships at Google and Facebook, Sarah walked into the Navy recruitment office in downtown Boston. The recruiter, Petty Officer First Class Rodriguez, looked up from his paperwork at the small Asian woman standing uncertainly in his doorway. She wore an oversized MIT sweatshirt and carried a worn backpack. Her voice was so quiet he had to strain to hear her. "I want to be a Navy SEAL," she said. Rodriguez nearly laughed. The woman in front of him looked like she would struggle to carry a heavy grocery bag, let alone survive the most brutal military training in the world. But something in her eyes stopped him from dismissing her immediately. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "the SEAL program is extremely demanding. The physical requirements alone eliminate most candidates, and those who make it through basic underwater demolition/SEAL training are typically large, aggressive men with extensive athletic backgrounds." "I understand," Sarah replied, still in that barely audible voice. "I want to try." What followed were months of bureaucratic battles, physical testing, and psychological evaluations. Sarah endured countless officials telling her she was wasting everyone's time, that she should consider other Navy careers better suited to someone of her size and temperament. She nodded politely to each criticism and continued training. She ran 8 miles every morning before classes. She swam laps in MIT's pool until the lifeguards had to force her to leave. She practiced holding her breath underwater until she could remain submerged for nearly 4 minutes. She learned to function on 3 hours of sleep while maintaining perfect grades in advanced computer science courses. Most importantly, she learned to hide her preparation from everyone around her. Her professors saw a dedicated student. Her classmates saw a quiet girl who was always slightly out of breath from rushing to classes. Nobody suspected that she was transforming herself into something unprecedented. The night before graduation, Sarah's parents took her to dinner at an expensive restaurant in Cambridge. They were proud of their daughter's academic achievements and excited about her job offer from a prestigious tech company in California. "We're so proud of you, sweetheart," her father said, raising his glass of wine. "You've accomplished everything we dreamed of for you." Sarah smiled and clinked her glass against theirs. She had not told them about her Navy plans. That conversation would come later, after she had proven it was possible. 2 weeks after graduation, Sarah Chun reported to Navy boot camp in Great Lakes, Illinois. She had convinced her parents she was taking a gap year to travel before starting her corporate career. In reality, she was about to attempt something that had never been done before. The other recruits in her company immediately marked her as an easy target. She was smaller than everyone, quieter than everyone, and seemed completely out of place in the aggressive environment of military training. During their first week, a large recruit from Texas named Morrison decided to establish his dominance by targeting the tiny Asian girl who barely spoke above a whisper. "Hey, China doll," Morrison called out during a break in training. "You lost? The librarian convention is down the street." His friends laughed as Sarah looked up from the manual she was reading. She studied Morrison's face for a moment, memorizing the structure of his jaw, the angle of his nose, the distance between his temples and his throat. Then she smiled politely. "My name is Sarah," she said quietly, "and I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Morrison took a step closer, enjoying the audience. "This ain't a place for little girls who belong in computer labs. You're gonna wash out in the first week, sweetheart. Might as well quit now and save yourself the embarrassment." Sarah nodded thoughtfully, as if considering his advice. "You might be right," she said. "I suppose we'll find out." That night, after lights out, Morrison discovered that someone had short-sheeted his bed, filled his boots with shaving cream, and somehow managed to tie his shoelaces into knots so complex that he had to cut them free in the morning. When he accused Sarah, she looked genuinely confused and concerned. "Why would I do something like that?" she asked innocently. "I was sleeping right here all night." Her bunkmate confirmed that Sarah had never left her bed. Morrison couldn't prove anything, and the drill instructor showed no interest in his complaints about pranks. The harassment continued for 3 more days. Each morning, Morrison found new evidence of nocturnal sabotage. His rifle was disassembled and reassembled backward. His uniform was sewn together in creative ways. His alarm clock was reset to go off every 30 minutes. Each time he accused Sarah, she provided innocent explanations or unshakable alibis. On the 4th day, Morrison discovered that someone had replaced his shampoo with honey. As he stood in the shower, frantically trying to wash the sticky mess from his hair, while his fellow recruits pointed and laughed, he finally understood that he had picked the wrong target. He never bothered Sarah again. Boot camp was the easy part. Sarah finished in the top 10% of her class, earning recognition for her academic excellence, marksmanship scores, and unexpected leadership during navigation exercises. Her company commander noted in her file that despite her quiet demeanor, recruit Chun had a remarkable ability to inspire confidence and cooperation from her fellow sailors. What he didn't note was that Sarah had spent 8 weeks carefully studying every aspect of military training, identifying weaknesses in standard procedures, and developing solutions to problems her instructors hadn't yet encountered. She filed these observations away for future use, knowing that much greater challenges awaited. The real test came 6 months later, when Sarah reported to Naval Amphibious Base Coronado in California for basic underwater demolition/SEAL training. She arrived on a hot Tuesday morning in September, carrying the same worn backpack she had brought to MIT and wearing the standard-issue physical training uniform that hung loosely on her small frame. Bud/S Class 247 consisted of 165 candidates. Sarah Chun was the only woman, the smallest person by at least 40 pounds, and probably the quietest individual to ever attempt SEAL training. As she stood in formation with the other candidates, she looked like a child who had wandered into the wrong place. The instructors made no secret of their skepticism. Chief Petty Officer Ramirez, a 20-year veteran who had trained thousands of SEAL candidates, addressed the class on their first day with brutal honesty. "Look around you," he commanded. "Most of you will be gone within a week. This is not a program for the weak, the uncommitted, or the unprepared. We are here to identify the 2% of candidates who possess the mental and physical capabilities to serve in the most elite fighting force on Earth." His eyes found Sarah in the formation. "Some of you may think you've wandered into the wrong place. Trust your instincts. The door is right behind you, and there's no shame in walking through it now." Sarah stared straight ahead, her expression unchanged. Inside, she was calculating angles, assessing her competition, and preparing for the war she knew was coming. She had spent 4 years preparing for this moment. Now it was time to find out if preparation could overcome prejudice, if intelligence could triumph over size, and if the quiet girl everyone underestimated could prove them all wrong. The first phase of BUD/S was about to begin, and Sarah Chun was ready to discover what she was truly capable of becoming. Hell Week began on a Sunday night that felt like the end of the world. Sarah Chun stood on the beach at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado, shivering in the Pacific Ocean spray as instructors circled the remaining candidates like predators. Of the original 165 members of BUD/S Class 247, only 89 remained after 6 weeks of preliminary training. The others had either quit, been injured, or failed to meet the rigorous standards. Now came the ultimate test: 5.5 days with a total of 4 hours of sleep, while instructors pushed candidates beyond every conceivable limit. Hell Week was designed to break spirits, reveal character, and separate those who merely wanted to be SEALs from those who would die before quitting. "This is your last chance to walk away with dignity," Chief Petty Officer Ramirez announced, his voice cutting through the sound of waves crashing against the shore. "Once Hell Week begins, quitting becomes a public humiliation. Ring the bell 3 times, place your helmet on the ground, and everyone will know you couldn't handle what real warriors endure." Sarah studied the brass bell mounted on a post nearby. Dozens of helmets already surrounded its base, representing candidates who had discovered their limitations during the preliminary weeks. The sight was meant to be intimidating, but Sarah found it oddly comforting. Each helmet represented someone who had chosen the easy path. She had not trained for 4 years to make easy choices. The first evolution began at midnight. Candidates were ordered into the surf, where they lay in the 58-degree water while waves crashed over them repeatedly. The cold was immediately brutal, seeping through their clothes and into their bones. Sarah felt her body temperature plummeting, her muscles cramping, her breathing becoming shallow and rapid. Around her, men twice her size began struggling within minutes. The cold attacked everyone equally, but Sarah had advantages her classmates didn't recognize. Her smaller body mass meant she lost heat faster, but it also meant she had trained specifically for this disadvantage. While other candidates had focused on building muscle, Sarah had spent countless hours conditioning her body to function in extreme cold. She had filled bathtubs with ice water and force herself to remain submerged until her core temperature dropped to dangerous levels. She had practiced controlled breathing techniques learned from freediving manuals, allowing her to maintain mental clarity even as hypothermia began setting in. She had studied the physiological effects of cold water immersion and knew exactly how long she could survive before permanent damage occurred. Most importantly, she had learned to separate her mind from her body's distress signals. While candidates around her moaned and shivered uncontrollably, Sarah retreated into a mental space where the cold became merely information rather than suffering. After 90 minutes in the surf, Instructor Petty Officer Williams decided to test the class's resolve. He walked directly to Sarah, who lay motionless in the sand as waves broke over her small form. "Candidate Chun," he shouted over the sound of the ocean, "you've been hypothermic for the past 30 minutes. Your lips are blue, your hands are shaking, and you weigh about as much as my left leg. This is your opportunity to quit with honor. Nobody expects you to continue." Sarah opened her eyes and looked directly at Williams. Her voice, though chattering with cold, was steady and clear. "Respectfully, Instructor Williams, I did not come here to meet expectations." Williams stared at her for a long moment. Then, he moved on to the next candidate, a former college football player who was openly crying from the cold. That man rang the bell within 10 minutes. The pattern continued for the next 5 days. While larger, stronger candidates succumbed to exhaustion, hypothermia, and the relentless psychological pressure Sarah endured, she discovered that her small size, which everyone viewed as a disadvantage, actually provided unique benefits during certain evolutions. During log PT, where teams of 6 candidates carried 200-pound logs through obstacle courses, Sarah's low center of gravity made her exceptionally stable. While others struggled to maintain their footing on uneven surfaces, Sarah became the anchor that kept her team moving forward. During underwater, knot-tying exercises, her smaller lung capacity was offset by superior breath control and the ability to remain calm in oxygen-deprived situations. She completed complex knots while other candidates surfaced early, gasping for air. During the 2-mile ocean swims in rough surf, her efficient stroke technique and understanding of current patterns allowed her to maintain position with candidates who possessed significantly greater upper body strength. But the real revelation came during the sleep deprivation phases of training. By Wednesday of Hell Week, candidates had been awake for nearly 72 hours. They stumbled through evolutions like zombies, their cognitive function severely impaired. Many began hallucinating, seeing objects that weren't there or becoming confused about basic instructions. Sarah, however, seemed to grow sharper as others deteriorated. She had spent years training her mind to function on minimal sleep, often staying awake for days while working on complex programming projects during college. More importantly, she had studied the psychological effects of sleep deprivation and developed techniques for maintaining mental clarity even when her brain was operating on fumes. While other candidates made critical errors during navigation exercises, Sarah led her boat crew through complicated surf passages with precision. While others forgot the proper sequence for assembling and disassembling weapons, Sarah completed the tasks flawlessly. While others became irritable and started arguments with teammates, Sarah remained calm and focused on mission objectives. By Thursday evening, the instructors began taking notice. "Candidate Chun," Chief Ramirez called out during a brief meal break. "Step forward." Sarah approached the chief, wondering if she had finally reached her breaking point. Her body felt like it belonged to someone else, her legs shaky from exhaustion and hypothermia. But her mind remained clear and focused. "In 20 years of training SEAL candidates," Ramirez said, "I have never seen anyone your size make it this far through Hell Week. How are you doing this?" Sarah considered the question carefully. She could have mentioned her years of preparation, her systematic study of SEAL training methods, or her dedication to physical conditioning. Instead, she gave the simpler truth. "Chief, I'm not trying to prove I am as strong as the other candidates. I'm trying to prove I am strong enough for the mission." Ramirez nodded slowly. "And what mission is that, candidate?" "To serve alongside the best warriors in the world, Chief. To be someone they can count on when everything goes wrong." That night, during the final surf torture evolution, something unexpected happened. As candidates lay in the freezing water for the 100th time, several began showing signs of severe hypothermia. One man, a former Marine named Rodriguez, started convulsing uncontrollably. Sarah recognized the symptoms immediately. Rodriguez was entering the final stage of hypothermia, where the body's core temperature drops so low that cardiac arrest becomes likely. The instructors were focused on other candidates and hadn't yet noticed the severity of his condition. Without hesitation, Sarah rolled toward Rodriguez and positioned her body between him and the incoming waves. She wrapped her arms around him, sharing what little body heat she possessed while using her own body as a windbreak. She began talking to him in a low, steady voice, keeping him conscious and preventing him from slipping into the disorientation that often preceded hypothermic coma. "Stay with me, Rodriguez," she whispered. "We're almost done. Your family is counting on you to finish this." An instructor finally noticed the situation and called for medical personnel. As Rodriguez was carried to the medical tent, he managed to grab Sarah's arm. "Thank you," he gasped through chattering teeth. "You saved my life." Sarah simply nodded and returned to her position in the surf. Rodriguez recovered and graduated with the class 6 months later. He would later serve 3 tours in Afghanistan, where his life was saved multiple times by the training he received at BUD/S. But the incident marked a turning point in how the instructors viewed Sarah Chun. Friday morning brought the final challenge of Hell Week. Candidates who had survived nearly 6 days of continuous training were ordered to participate in a team exercise called Around the World. Each boat crew had to navigate a complex course around Coronado Island, covering 12 miles of open ocean in inflatable boats while carrying full combat loads. Sarah's boat crew consisted of 5 other candidates, all of whom outweighed her by at least 60 pounds. As the smallest member, she was assigned to be the coxswain, responsible for navigation and steering while the others paddled. The weather was brutal. 20-foot swells crashed over their boat repeatedly, filling it with water that had to be constantly bailed out. 40-knot winds pushed them off course, requiring constant corrections. The other boat crews struggled to maintain formation as exhausted paddlers began making mistakes. Sarah, however, had studied ocean navigation extensively. She understood how to read wave patterns, wind direction, and current flows. More importantly, she knew how to motivate a team when everyone was beyond their physical limits. "Listen to me," she called out to her boat crew as they fought through particularly rough surf. "We are not racing the other boats. We are racing ourselves. Every stroke you take is proof that you belong here. Every mile we complete is another step toward becoming what we came here to become." Her voice cut through the wind and waves with surprising authority. Despite her small size, she had developed an ability to project confidence and determination that inspired others to push beyond their perceived limitations. When one of her paddlers, a former college wrestler named Thompson, began falling behind due to severe muscle cramps, Sarah adjusted their course to take advantage of a favorable current she had identified. When another paddler started vomiting from seasickness and exhaustion, she redistributed the workload while maintaining their speed. Most importantly, when their boat began taking on water faster than they could bail it out, Sarah made a decision that demonstrated her understanding of true leadership. Instead of ordering others to bail faster, she handed her paddle to the sickest member of the crew and took over the physically demanding job of bailing water. For the next 2 hours, Sarah worked frantically to keep their boat afloat while navigating through some of the roughest seas any of the candidates had ever experienced. Her arms burned with lactic acid buildup, her back screamed from the repetitive motion, and her hands bled from rope burns. But she never stopped working, never complained, and never showed any sign that she was struggling. When they finally reached the finish line, Sarah's boat crew had completed the course in the second fastest time of any team. As they pulled their boat onto the beach, Thompson grabbed Sarah's shoulder. "I don't know how you did that," he said, breathing heavily. "But you just got all of us through Hell Week." Sarah looked back at the ocean they had just conquered, then at the faces of her teammates. For the first time since arriving at BUD/S, she smiled. "We got each other through," she replied quietly. That's what teams do. Chief Ramirez was waiting for them on the beach. As the candidates stood at attention, he looked each of them in the eye before speaking. "Congratulations," he said. "You have survived Hell Week. You have proven that you possess the basic mental and physical capabilities required to begin SEAL training. But understand this. Hell Week is not the end of your journey. It is the beginning. The real test of whether you belong in our community will come in the months ahead, when you learn to apply these capabilities to actual combat missions." His eyes found Sarah in the formation. "Some of you have surprised everyone, including yourselves. Others have performed exactly as expected. All of you have earned the right to continue." That evening, Sarah sat alone on the beach, watching the sunset over the Pacific Ocean. Her body was destroyed from 6 days of continuous abuse, but her mind was clearer than it had ever been. She had accomplished something that military experts had declared impossible. She had proven that determination could overcome physical limitations, that preparation could triumph over natural disadvantages, and that the quiet ones were sometimes the most dangerous of all. But as she watched the waves crash against the shore, Sarah knew that Hell Week was only the beginning of her transformation. The real challenges still lay ahead, and she would need to become something even more extraordinary to succeed in the missions that awaited her. The girl who had been invisible for her entire life was finally becoming visible, one impossible achievement at a time. 18 months after Hell Week, Sarah Chun had become someone completely different, though few people would have recognized the transformation. Standing in the equipment room at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado, she methodically checked her gear for the 100th time. Every piece of equipment had been tested, maintained, and positioned exactly where muscle memory would find it in complete darkness. Her rifle, a custom-modified 416 Hong Kong dollars, felt like an extension of her body. Her knife, a tactical blade she had personally sharpened to surgical precision, sat in its sheath with the familiar weight of a trusted tool. But the most significant changes weren't visible in her equipment or her now muscled frame. The transformation had occurred in her mind, where years of training had created something unprecedented, a 5'2" operator capable of eliminating threats that would challenge men twice her size. The journey from Hell Week survivor to fully qualified Navy SEAL had been brutal beyond anything she had experienced. While Hell Week tested basic mental resilience, the advanced phases of BUD/S and SEAL qualification training demanded mastery of dozens of specialized skills: underwater demolition, advanced weapon systems, combat medicine, intelligence gathering, long-range reconnaissance, and close-quarters combat. Sarah had approached each skill set with the same methodical preparation that had carried her through initial training. But now she had advantages that her instructors were beginning to recognize and her fellow candidates were learning to respect. During underwater demolition training, her small hands allowed her to work in confined spaces where larger operators struggled. She could rig explosive charges in tight spots between hull plates, install listening devices in cramped machinery compartments, and navigate through partially flooded structures that would trap bigger team members. During weapons training, her steady hands and exceptional vision made her a natural sniper. While other candidates focused on raw firepower, Sarah developed precision that bordered on supernatural. She could place bullets through quarter-sized targets at 800 meters in variable wind conditions. More importantly, she learned to make impossible shots from awkward positions, hanging upside down from helicopter skids, lying prone in unstable boats, or firing one-handed while rappelling down building faces. But it was during close-quarters combat training that Sarah truly distinguished herself. Her instructor for advanced hand-to-hand combat was Master Chief Petty Officer Elena Vasquez, a legendary operator who had served 12 tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. Vasquez was known for her ability to end fights in seconds, regardless of her opponent's size or experience. She was also notorious for her skepticism about female operators. "Combat is not about fairness," Vasquez announced to Sarah's training group during their first session. "It's about ending threats as quickly and efficiently as possible. Size matters. Strength matters. Reach matters. But what matters most is understanding how to turn your opponent's advantages into vulnerabilities." She gestured towards Sarah, who stood among 6 male candidates, all of whom towered over her. Chun, you're going to learn techniques that other operators will never need, because you're facing challenges they'll never face. But if you master these techniques, you'll become more dangerous than any of them. What followed were 6 months of the most intensive combat training Sarah had ever experienced. Vasquez taught her to think like a predator, to identify weaknesses instantly, and to exploit those weaknesses with surgical precision. Sarah learned that her small size was actually an advantage in close combat. She could move under larger opponents' defenses, attack from unexpected angles, and target pressure points that bigger fighters couldn't effectively reach. She studied anatomy obsessively, memorizing the exact locations of every nerve cluster, artery, and joint that could be used to disable an opponent. More importantly, she learned to weaponize her opponent's expectations. Most people who attacked small women expected minimal resistance. They anticipated fear, hesitation, and defensive reactions. Sarah learned to use those expectations as camouflage, appearing helpless right up until the moment she became lethal. Your greatest weapon is not your strength, Vasquez explained during one particularly intense training session. Your greatest weapon is the fact that no one sees you coming. Use that. Sarah's education in violence was comprehensive and disturbing. She learned 17 different ways to kill someone with her bare hands. She practiced until she could disable an armed attacker in less than 2 seconds. She studied psychological manipulation techniques that could turn multiple attackers against each other. But perhaps most importantly, she learned to control the psychological aftermath of violence. Vasquez had seen too many operators destroyed by the mental weight of what they had done in combat. She taught Sarah to compartmentalize, to separate the person she was during missions from the person she was in civilian life. You're learning to become 2 different people, Vasquez warned her. There's the Sarah who programs computers and lives quietly in the world. And there's the Sarah who eliminates threats to protect innocent people. Never confuse the two, and never let one contaminate the other. Sarah's final test came during a simulated hostage rescue exercise. The scenario involved armed terrorists holding civilians in a mock office building. Sarah's team was tasked with infiltrating the building, neutralizing the threats, and extracting the hostages without casualties. The exercise was designed to be nearly impossible. The terrorists were experienced military personnel armed with live ammunition training rounds. The building was equipped with advanced surveillance systems. The hostages were instructed to act panicked and uncooperative. Multiple variables would change randomly throughout the exercise, forcing operators to adapt their plans in real time. Sarah's team leader assigned her to reconnaissance and sniper support, expecting her to provide intelligence from a distance while larger team members handled direct confrontation. But when their assault plan went wrong and 2 team members were killed by superior firepower, Sarah made a decision that surprised everyone. Instead of maintaining her distant position, she infiltrated the building through a ventilation system too small for her teammates to navigate. Using skills learned during underwater demolition training, she moved through the structure's mechanical spaces like a ghost, completely invisible to the surveillance systems focused on normal entry points. What happened next was captured on training cameras and later became required viewing for all SEAL candidates. Sarah emerged from an air conditioning vent behind the first terrorist, a former Marine instructor who outweighed her by 120 pounds. Before he could react to her presence, she applied a blood choke that rendered him unconscious in 4 seconds. She caught his body before it could fall and make noise, then proceeded to the next target. The second terrorist was positioned to cover the main hallway, his attention focused on the approach routes his training had taught him to watch. Sarah approached from directly above, dropping from a ceiling access point she had identified during her reconnaissance. Her knife found the precise spot between his collarbone and shoulder blade that would disable his dominant arm instantly. As he reached for a weapon with his offhand, she applied a submission hold that put him to sleep without giving him time to call for help. The third and fourth terrorists were positioned together, their backs to a wall that they believed provided security. Sarah used a technique Vasquez had taught her, creating a distraction by throwing a small object down a distant hallway. As both men turned to investigate the sound, she moved through the blind spot and disabled both of them using pressure points that caused immediate paralysis. The final terrorist was holding 3 hostages in the central office. He was the most experienced instructor in the exercise, a former Delta Force operator who had never been successfully neutralized during training scenarios. He was also positioned where traditional assault techniques would result in hostage casualties. Sarah studied the situation for 30 seconds, then implemented a solution that no one had anticipated. She activated the building's fire suppression system, filling the room with thick smoke and triggering emergency lighting that strobed irregularly. In the confusion that followed, she used the terrorist's own reflexes against him. When the smoke detectors began wailing, the terrorist instinctively looked up toward the ceiling, a natural human response to fire alarms. In that moment of distraction, Sarah moved through the smoke with navigation skills learned during underwater training. She approached from the one angle he couldn't cover while maintaining control of the hostages. Her attack lasted less than 3 seconds. A strike to his solar plexus that doubled him over. A knee to his temple as he bent forward. A submission hold that ensured he couldn't threaten the hostages even if he regained consciousness. When the exercise ended, the entire training staff stood in stunned silence. Sarah had neutralized 5 experienced operators without using any weapons, without causing any permanent injuries, and without placing any hostages at risk. She had accomplished something that none of the instructors thought was possible. Master Chief Vasquez approached Sarah as she helped the hostages exit the building. Her expression was unreadable. "Chun," she said quietly, "that was the most impressive demonstration of tactical problem-solving I've witnessed in 15 years of training operators." Sarah looked up at her instructor, her face showing no emotion. "Thank you, Master Chief. Did I pass?" Vasquez smiled for the first time since Sarah had known her. "You didn't just pass. You redefined what's possible." 2 weeks later, Sarah Chun graduated from SEAL qualification training with honors. She was the first woman to complete the program, but more importantly, she had proven that elite military training could create capabilities that transcended physical limitations. During the graduation ceremony, her parents sat in the audience, finally learning what their daughter had accomplished during her supposed gap year. Her father, Colonel Chun, watched with tears in his eyes as his quiet daughter received the special warfare designation that marked her as one of the deadliest people on Earth. But Sarah's real education was just beginning. Within days of graduation, she received orders for her first deployment, a classified counterterrorism mission in a region where American Special Operations Forces officially did not exist. She would be part of a 6-person team tasked with eliminating high-value targets who had evaded capture for over 2 years. As she prepared for the deployment, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. The invisible girl who had once been dismissed as useless had become someone capable of things that few people could imagine. But she had also become someone who carried secrets that would forever separate her from the normal world. Standing in her quarters, packing equipment for a mission she couldn't discuss with anyone outside her team, Sarah understood that she had crossed a line from which there was no return. She had become a weapon disguised as an ordinary person, a predator camouflaged as prey. Soon, she would discover just how effectively that camouflage could work and what happened when evil people made the mistake of underestimating the quiet girl who knew exactly how to kill them. 3 years later, Sarah Chun walked through the underground parking garage of her Denver office building, her footsteps echoing softly against concrete walls. To anyone watching, she appeared to be exactly what she claimed to be, a quiet software engineer heading home after another long day debugging code and attending pointless meetings. She carried a worn laptop bag over her shoulder and moved with the slightly hunched posture of someone who spent too many hours staring at computer screens. Her clothes were unremarkable: dark slacks, a simple sweater, comfortable walking shoes. Everything about her appearance suggested mundane normalcy. But appearances could be deceiving. The woman walking through that garage had spent the previous 4 years serving in places that didn't exist on any official maps, eliminating threats that were never reported in any newspapers. She had operated in 12 countries, completed 27 classified missions, and saved countless lives by ending others with surgical precision. Sarah's SEAL career had been remarkable by any standard. Her small size and unremarkable appearance had made her invaluable for covert operations requiring subtlety rather than overwhelming force. While her teammates kicked down doors and cleared rooms with automatic weapons, Sarah specialized in solutions that left no trace of American involvement. She had posed as a tourist in Eastern European cities while tracking arms dealers. She had worked as a translator in Middle Eastern compounds while gathering intelligence on terrorist networks. She had attended diplomatic functions in African nations while positioning herself to eliminate targets who believed they were untouchable. Her success rate had been perfect. Every mission accomplished, every objective achieved, every team member brought home alive. But that success had come at a cost that was beginning to weigh on her conscience. The turning point had come 8 months earlier, during an operation in Syria that had gone exactly according to plan, but had left Sarah questioning whether she could continue living as a professional killer. The target had been Ahmad Nazir, a financier who funneled money to terrorist organizations throughout the region. Intelligence indicated that he was planning to fund a series of attacks on American civilians, making his elimination a high priority for national security. Sarah's mission was to infiltrate a charity dinner where Nazir would be present, identify his location, and eliminate him without creating any evidence of American involvement. The operation required her to pose as an aid worker, establish credibility with other attendees, and wait for the perfect opportunity to strike. Everything had proceeded flawlessly. Sarah had spent weeks building her cover identity, studying Nazir's habits, and planning an approach that would allow her to get close enough for a clean kill. The charity dinner provided the perfect opportunity. Nazir had been charming and sophisticated, discussing humanitarian projects with genuine enthusiasm. To the other attendees, he appeared to be a successful businessman using his wealth to help refugees and orphans. Sarah had observed him for 2 hours, watching him interact with aid workers, donate generously to various causes, and speak passionately about helping children affected by warfare. When the opportunity came, Sarah had been ready. A brief conversation in a quiet hallway, a handshake that positioned her properly, and a strike to a pressure point that would cause what appeared to be a sudden heart attack. Nazir had collapsed within seconds, dying before medical help could arrive. The entire interaction had lasted less than 30 seconds and had appeared completely natural to security cameras. The mission was a complete success. A dangerous terrorist financier had been eliminated without any evidence of foul play, and American lives had been saved. Sarah had performed exactly as trained, demonstrating the skills that made her one of the most effective operators in the SEAL community. But as she had watched Nazir's body being carried away by paramedics, Sarah had found herself thinking about the conversation she had witnessed earlier that evening. The man she had just killed had been discussing plans to build schools and refugee camps. He had shown photographs of children whose medical treatments he had funded. He had spoken with tears in his eyes about wanting to create a better world. Intelligence reports had been correct about his terrorist financing activities. But they hadn't mentioned his legitimate humanitarian work, his genuine love for his family, or the complexity of a man who simultaneously funded both orphanages and suicide bombers. For the first time in her career, Sarah had wondered whether the world was really divided as clearly between good and evil as her training had assumed. That doubt had grown during subsequent missions, eventually leading to her decision to leave active duty and return to civilian life. She had completed her service commitment with honor, earned commendations that would remain forever classified, and transitioned back to the world of ordinary people doing ordinary jobs. Now she was debugging software instead of eliminating human targets, attending team meetings instead of planning tactical operations, and trying to convince herself that she could live a normal life despite the secrets she carried. But as Sarah walked through the parking garage on that December evening, she was about to discover that some skills could never be completely retired. The garage was nearly empty at 9:30 p.m., most employees having left hours earlier. Sarah's footsteps echoed in the concrete space as she made her way toward her modest Honda Civic, parked in her assigned spot near the rear wall. She was mentally reviewing the code problems she would tackle tomorrow when her situational awareness training automatically registered details that civilian Sarah would have ignored. A van with tinted windows was parked in a visitor space, its engine running despite the late hour. Two men stood near the stairwell, their positioning suggesting they were watching rather than walking. A third figure moved in the shadows near the elevator bank, his posture indicating he was trying to remain concealed. Sarah's civilian mind wanted to dismiss these observations as paranormal coincidence. Perhaps the van belonged to a delivery driver. Maybe the men were maintenance workers. The figure by the elevator could be another employee heading home late. But her operator's instincts recognized a tactical setup when she saw one. Without changing her pace or showing any sign of awareness, Sarah continued walking toward her car while conducting a threat assessment that had become as automatic as breathing. 3 visible hostiles, possibly more concealed. Vehicle positioned to block the main exit. Subjects positioned to control stairwell and elevator access. Classic kidnapping formation. The question was whether she was the specific target or simply a target of opportunity. She got her answer when one of the men near the stairwell spoke into a radio, his voice barely audible, but carrying the distinct tone of operational coordination. Package is moving toward the vehicle. Initiate in 30 seconds. Sarah felt the familiar combination of adrenaline and deadly calm that had carried her through dozens of combat situations. But this time was different. This time she wasn't wearing tactical gear or carrying weapons. This time she was supposed to be an ordinary civilian who would react with panic and helplessness when confronted by superior numbers. This time, her attackers had no idea what they were about to face. Sarah reached her car and fumbled with her keys, playing the role of a distracted woman focused on ordinary concerns. She dropped her laptop bag and bent to retrieve it, using the movement to scan for additional threats and identify potential weapons among the environmental objects around her. The men moved with military precision, confirming Sarah's assessment that she was dealing with professionals rather than common criminals. They approached from 3 directions simultaneously, cutting off her escape routes while maintaining positions that would prevent her from reaching help. Ms. Chun, the largest man, called out, his voice friendly but commanding. "We need to speak with you. Please step away from your vehicle." Sarah straightened slowly, her mind automatically calculating angles, distances, and timing while her face showed the confusion and fear that would be expected from an ordinary citizen. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice carrying just the right note of nervous uncertainty. "Do I know you?" The man smiled, but his eyes remained cold and professional. He was approximately 6 feet 2 inches, 220 pounds, with the build and bearing of former military. His 2 companions were slightly smaller, but moved with the same trained efficiency. "We're federal agents, Ms. Chun. We have some questions about your previous employment. This won't take long if you cooperate." Sarah knew immediately that these men were not federal agents. Real agents would have approached her during business hours in a professional environment with proper identification and legal protocols. Real agents wouldn't need to corner her in an isolated parking garage. But she also knew that revealing her suspicions would trigger a violent confrontation that she preferred to avoid. Better to gather more information while maintaining her cover as a confused civilian. "I think there's been some mistake," she said, taking a small step backward. "I'm just a software engineer. I don't understand what previous employment you're referring to." The second man moved slightly to his left, maintaining the triangle formation while closing the distance. Sarah tracked his movement without appearing to watch him, her muscle memory automatically identifying his likely approach vectors and vulnerable points. "Ms. Chun," the leader continued, "we know about your military service. We know about your special operations background. And we know that you possess information that certain people find extremely valuable." Now Sarah understood the situation completely. Someone had identified her real background and decided that her knowledge of classified operations could be monetized. Whether they planned to sell her to foreign intelligence services, terrorist organizations, or private military contractors was irrelevant. What mattered was that they intended to take her alive, which meant they needed to subdue rather than kill her. That intention would prove to be their fatal mistake. "I don't know what you're talking about," Sarah said, allowing her voice to show increasing panic. "I just write software. I've never been in the military." The third man, who had been silent until now, stepped forward with what appeared to be a taser. "Ms. Chun, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. But you're coming with us either way." Sarah looked around the garage with apparent desperation, her eyes wide and her breathing rapid. To her attackers, she appeared to be a terrified woman realizing she had no escape options. In reality, she was completing her tactical assessment and preparing to demonstrate why underestimating quiet people was often the last mistake predators ever made. "Please," she whispered, backing against her car. "I don't understand what you want from me." The leader gestured to his companions, who began moving forward to secure their target. They had planned for resistance from a trained soldier, but they expected that resistance to be limited by her civilian environment and her desire to avoid civilian casualties. They had not planned for what actually happened when they realized they weren't facing a former soldier trying to adapt military skills to a civilian situation. They were facing a predator who had spent years perfecting the art of appearing harmless right up until the moment she became lethal. And that moment was about to arrive. The transformation began the instant the man with the taser took his first aggressive step towards Sarah. Years of training had conditioned her to recognize the precise moment when violence became inevitable. The shift in body language, the narrowing of focus, the subtle tells that indicated an attacker had moved from posturing to action. Sarah had learned to identify that moment and respond to it faster than conscious thought could process what was happening. The man with the taser expected to face a frightened woman backing desperately against her car. Instead, he found himself confronting something that moved like liquid death. Sarah's first movement was a lateral step that took her out of the triangle formation while simultaneously positioning her opponent's body between herself and his two companions. The motion appeared to be a panicked attempt to flee, but it was actually a tactical maneuver that isolated her first target while preventing the others from intervening. Her second movement was an upward strike with the heel of her palm that connected with the taser-wielding man's wrist at the exact moment he pulled the trigger. The impact redirected the weapon's electrodes into the concrete wall while simultaneously fracturing two bones in his forearm. The pain caused his hand to open involuntarily, and the taser clattered across the garage floor. Her third movement was a knee strike to his solar plexus that doubled him over and positioned his head at the perfect angle for the elbow strike that followed. The combination rendered him unconscious in under 2 seconds while creating the impression that he had simply stumbled and fallen. The entire sequence lasted less than 3 heartbeats and appeared so natural that the other two attackers initially didn't understand what had happened. They saw their partner collapse and assumed he had suffered some kind of medical emergency. Sarah used their moment of confusion to assess her remaining opponents while positioning herself near a concrete pillar that would provide cover if they were armed with firearms. The leader was reaching inside his jacket, his hand moving toward what was likely a concealed weapon. The third man was speaking rapidly into his radio, calling for backup that Sarah hoped was not already in position. Time was now her primary enemy. Every second that passed increased the likelihood that additional hostiles would arrive, that witnesses would appear, or that the situation would escalate beyond her ability to control it. Sarah needed to end this confrontation immediately, decisively, and quietly. The leader's hand emerged from his jacket holding a pistol, but his draw was slow and telegraphed. Sarah had identified his weapon type, grip position, and likely first target before he cleared leather. More importantly, she had already begun moving to neutralize the threat while he was still deciding how to deploy it. Sarah's approach was one that Master Chief Vasquez had taught her specifically for situations involving armed opponents who underestimated her capabilities. Instead of trying to match firepower with firepower, she would use the attacker's assumptions about her size and gender to position herself inside his decision curve. She stumbled forward with apparent clumsiness, her hands reaching out as if trying to steady herself against the wall. The movement made her appear off balance and helpless, exactly what the gunman expected from a panicked civilian. He adjusted his aim to track her movement, confident that he had time to line up a clean shot at the woman who was clearly too terrified to think straight. He was wrong about everything. Sarah's stumble was actually a controlled fall that brought her underneath his firing angle while building momentum for the attack that followed. Her reaching hands weren't seeking balance against the wall. They were positioning themselves to grab his gun arm and redirect his weapon away from her body. When she made contact, the gunman discovered that the woman he thought was panicking possessed grip strength that belonged on a much larger person. Sarah's hands locked around his wrist and forearm like steel cables, immobilizing his weapon while she used his own body weight to throw him off balance. The throw was a classic judo technique modified for combat application. Sarah used her hip as a fulcrum to lift the much larger man off his feet and drive him headfirst into the concrete pillar behind him. The impact was carefully calculated to cause immediate unconsciousness without permanent injury, though the distinction was probably irrelevant to someone whose head had just collided with reinforced concrete at high velocity. The gunman crumpled to the garage floor, his weapon skittering away into the shadows. In 5 seconds, Sarah had reduced the odds from 3-1 to 1-1 while maintaining the appearance of a lucky civilian who had somehow survived 2 random accidents. The third attacker was no longer confused about what was happening. He had watched Sarah move with speed and precision that belonged to someone with extensive combat training. He was reaching for his own weapon while simultaneously backing toward the exit, his radio call forgotten as survival instinct took over. But he was too slow and too predictable. Sarah had already identified him as the most dangerous remaining threat based on his positioning and reaction time. While his attention was focused on drawing his weapon, she was implementing a solution that he never saw coming. Her laptop bag, which she had dropped near her car, contained more than just computer equipment. Hidden among the power cables and software manuals was a tactical knife that she carried despite her civilian status. Old habits died hard, especially when those habits had kept her alive through dozens of combat operations. The knife flew across the garage with the accuracy that had made Sarah a legendary marksman during her SEAL career. But instead of targeting center mass or the head, she aimed for the man's gun hand. The blade pierced his palm and pinned it to the concrete wall behind him, making it impossible for him to complete his draw while causing enough pain to overwhelm his ability to think tactically. Sarah was moving before the knife found its target. By the time her opponent realized he had been disarmed, she was already inside his reach and applying a blood choke that would render him unconscious in seconds. "Sleep," she whispered as his body went limp. "And when you wake up, remember that you picked the wrong woman." The garage fell silent except for the sound of Sarah's controlled breathing and the distant hum of ventilation systems. 3 men who had planned to kidnap a defenseless computer programmer were now unconscious on a concrete floor, their careful plan destroyed by 90 seconds of violence so swift and efficient that security cameras would struggle to capture exactly what had happened. Sarah stood among her defeated attackers, her mind automatically shifting to damage control and evidence management. She retrieved her knife, wiped it clean, and returned it to her bag. She collected the weapons her opponents had dropped and secured them in her car. She checked each man's pulse to ensure they were alive, then positioned them to prevent choking if they vomited while unconscious. Finally, she retrieved the leader's cell phone and scrolled through his recent contacts, looking for clues about who had sent them and whether additional teams were involved. What she found made her blood run cold. The phone contained photographs of her apartment building, her daily routine, and her workplace. There were detailed files on her military service, including classified information that should have been impossible for civilians to access. Most disturbing were the text messages indicating that this was only the first of several planned operations. Someone with significant resources and high-level intelligence access had identified Sarah as a valuable asset and decided to acquire her services through kidnapping and coercion. The 3 men she had just defeated were part of a larger organization that would not give up simply because their first attempt had failed. Sarah realized that her quiet civilian life had just ended permanently. She could not return to her apartment, her job, or any aspect of her carefully constructed normal existence. The skills that had once kept her alive on foreign battlefields would now be necessary for survival in her own country. As she considered her options, Sarah felt a familiar sensation that she had not experienced since leaving active duty. The combination of hyper-awareness, tactical focus, and deadly calm that had made her one of the most effective operators in SEAL history was returning. The part of her personality that she had tried to suppress was awakening, and it was hungry for the kind of action that civilian life could not provide. Sarah Chun, software engineer and invisible civilian, was about to disappear forever. What would emerge from the shadows was someone far more dangerous. A woman who had spent years learning to kill with surgical precision and who no longer had any reason to pretend she was anything other than a predator. The men who had attacked her in the garage would eventually wake up with massive headaches and no clear memory of exactly what had happened to them. Their employers would receive a message that their first team had failed, their target had escaped, and their operation had been compromised. What they would not immediately understand was that they had awakened something that should have been left sleeping. They had forced a trained killer to abandon her cover and return to the shadows where she belonged. They had created an enemy who possessed skills they could not imagine and resources they did not know existed. Most importantly, they had reminded Sarah Chun who she really was underneath her civilian disguise. She was not a victim waiting to be rescued. She was not a target to be acquired. She was a weapon that had chosen to pretend it was something harmless, and that pretense had just ended. As Sarah drove away from the garage, leaving her attackers unconscious among the oil stains and tire marks, she began planning her response to whoever had made the mistake of threatening her peaceful life. They would discover that the quiet girl everyone underestimated was about to show them exactly what Navy SEALs were trained to do to people who posed threats to American citizens. The invisible woman was about to become very visible indeed, and her enemies were going to learn why some sleeping predators should never be awakened. The garage fell silent again, but the silence felt different now. It was not the peaceful quiet of an empty building, but the expectant stillness that follows the first shot of a war that everyone knows is just beginning. Sarah Chun had tried to leave her warrior life behind, but her warrior life had found her anyway. Now she would show her enemies what happened when they forced a SEAL to return to the hunt. They had wanted to capture a valuable asset. Instead, they had unleashed the most dangerous person they would ever face.